Okay guys, welcome back. This is part 3 in our Monster Hunt series. Having just previously created our canvas and set up our basic game loop, and I talked through the main function. If you're not understanding that, best to go back and re-watch that last video towards the end there and try and make sure you're understanding how this main loop function is working, because that's going to be pretty critical to getting all this going. But now in this section, we actually want to start to put some objects into, and some images and some objects into our program. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit here in my code. So we're actually going to work just before we create our game loop. So I'm going to start these just below my canvas. This is where I'm going to put these in, because this needs to happen before the game loop sort of starts. And I'm just going to leave myself a little comment here to say what we're doing in this section. So this section is all about adding images. So we want to add images and set up the game objects is our goal here. So that's all this stuff is going to go into here before our game loop actually happens. So make a little bit of space in there. So I'll deal with, we essentially want to do the same thing with 3 different images. We need to load 3 images here. We need to load the background image, we need to load the little hero image, and we need to load the monster image. So we'll just look at one of them, and all 3 are essentially going to be the same, just with loading different images. So I'm going to use, because we, as we spoke about when we looked at the canvas and loading images, if you remember, there's an issue with we can't draw the we can't draw the image on the canvas until it's loaded. So we've got to kind of wait until that load has happened. And also our actual drawing of the image is not going to happen until down here in our render function. So we don't actually want to draw it just yet either. So we're going to use a little technique where we use a variable, in this case BG ready we'll call it, so that's background ready is that short for. I'm going to set that to false because the background isn't ready just yet, which means we're then going to load, as we saw in our example, we've got to load our image using the new image method into a variable. We'll call it BG image, background image, and we use an onload function, and we have an anonymous function called when our background image loads, and I'm now going to say, okay, the image is ready to be drawn. So I'm just going to set the BG ready variable to true, which indicates, all right, we're all good. The image is loaded, it's now ready to draw it. But it's not going to be drawn until later on down in our render function. We're just getting it ready here. But I do need to set the source. So what image am I actually using? So bg image.source means I want my background image.png, so that's going to tell it what image needs to be loaded. So and we essentially are repeating that same process for each of the other 2 images that we have. So if that's the background image, we've got the same process for our hero image. Which is using a variable called hero ready, setting it to false, because it's not ready yet. We are creating a new image, loading that into a hero image variable. We are using an onload method like we did before to load the image when it's ready, and we're just going to set that variable to true, say okay, we're now ready, because we're drawing it later, the same process, and we're setting our source using hero image.source. And we're doing exactly the same thing with our monster. So in the end, we've got 3 different images ready to run, not drawn on the world yet. You'll see that if I save and live preview where I'm at. I've got nothing going on yet in my world. It's still blank. That's because they haven't been drawn yet. I haven't done that. That'll happen later on in my render function. I'm just getting them ready to be drawn. And we'll then need to enter the game loop to get going. But before we do that, before the game loop happens, we still now need because we're going to use our monster and our hero as objects, we need to create those game objects. So we're going to use 2 very simple objects. Now these are really simple objects. There's not a lot going on in these game objects just yet. We've got a hero object, and we're setting a speed, so we're sort of going to control how quickly he can move. 256, you can play around with that later on. And I don't even really need these, because I'm actually going to set the coordinates later when I draw it, but just so that there's some, we've got some properties in our object, so it looks a bit more normal, like when we talked about objects. I'm going to set an X and a Y, and I'll just set it at 0, but they'll be replaced later on when I actually draw and render those objects. And our monster object, again, just with dummy X and Y values set at 0, that we'll use later on. And there's only one more thing that we want to add to this, because obviously there is a need to add up how many monsters we've caught. We want to start our game at 0 monsters caught, and we want to add to that as we catch each of these little critters. So we're going to use a variable called monsters caught and set it to 0. So that stage has just gone through setting up my setting up my images. So our 3 images, which was background, so background image up here, hero image here, and our monster image here. We've followed the same process with all 3 of those to load them. We have got our game objects created, our hero and our monster. It's the only 2 that we've got, and we've set a variable up that's going to allow us to track how many monsters that we've caught. So that is our code that we've required in this stage, and we've seen that there's not too much happening just yet. We've got an empty world. That's correct, that you should have that right now, but I also don't have any errors going on if I try and run this. I've got no fail to load source, that's just the fave icon. That's fine, I can ignore that, safely ignore that one. I've got no actual code errors happening here, which is good. So now in our next stage, we're going to start to have a look at detecting our keyboard events of our up, down, left, right arrow keys, and what we do and how we go about doing that. So we'll see you back for that.